So Labour came out or started releasing details of their new efforts to reform the asylum and migration system to make it fit for the 21st century and hopefully to start bringing an end to illegal migration. The actual full details are still being released and everything else, but the newspapers and even Mahmood was starting to brief them out over the news cycle over the weekend. I welcome any efforts to get illegal migration under control. And I think that there are some very valuable things here that she's put forward in terms of direction of travel that I don't think will make a massive difference immediately, but in sense of setting the political weather are probably really, really important. No illegal is going to be probably put off coming across the channel because the British government may or may not take their valuables off of them. I think they probably realise that it's very unlikely to happen. The idea that you, as an asylum seeker, are here as a guest and that you can expect to depart once your country is safe to return to is an extremely valuable, important, and frankly right way of looking upon it. This should have always been the way. The only thing that I would argue here is the fact that the British state doesn't even keep track of the illegals arriving. I mean, they voluntarily tell the state where they are. Furthermore, the Home Office, which can barely tie its own shoelaces at the moment, is allegedly going to, every 3 years, review every case. Come on, be realistic. I think also on top of that, the big thing for me, which was very noticeable, was the fact that Mahmood basically has ruled this out for any legacy or historical arrivees into the country. This is important because what she's effectively doing is saying we're going to do this, but it's a problem. The legal side of it is a problem for in the future, and therefore we can claim ownership of the good things, but not have to deal with the actual outcomes later on. If you are only going to apply this to someone arriving on the boat tomorrow, then you've got going on 20 years before you potentially have to fight a legal case and find that it's been eviscerated by the Human Rights Act and ECHR. It probably won't take that long. It'll probably be no more than 2 to 3 years until this is brought, but it's still far enough into the future that it's not a problem that they have to consider right now. I think there's been a lot of, and again, this is based upon what we know of it, there is a great deal of acting tough, talking tough, but really winking knowingly at her own MPs going, come on, most of this is not really going to be that important. Take, for example, that they're going to take away the immediate right to shelter and everything else under one side set of laws, forgive me, or one form of status. But when you actually look into the details, the vast majority of asylum seekers are not actually processed in that way or given that status, and therefore it wouldn't affect them anyway. So overall, I suspect it will make absolutely no difference. I think the other thing that's kind of very telling is the fact that you've already had a chunk of Labour MPs coming out complaining about even this being too hard. That's probably as an important a thing as anything else, because it really underlines the fact that the party probably doesn't really have the stomach to do even limited reforms that would in any way have a meaningful impact on illegals. My position on it is kind of even more straightforward than that. If you are arriving in this country illegally, you should not be receiving any right to remain. You should be deported immediately. I don't want illegals arriving in this country. I have no reason to have illegals arrive in this country. And in due course, I expect to see all illegals arriving in this country being deported almost immediately. So I think this is, again, the bit that Labour doesn't really quite understand, the fact that the public mood has moved on substantially, particularly as the fact that again, one part of the knowing wink to the Labour Party parliamentary party and the membership overall that Mahmood's put in here is the fact that there would be safe legal routes opened up to include for an unspecified amount of people. Again, well, how many people? What's the process for that? When are they going home? We don't know. Again, what you're actually seeing is the effort to tack in towards where the public is, but kind of figuratively and in a relatively illusionary way. And what I mean by that is, again, it's not really what the public want. The truth is, we don't want illegal migration. The truth is, the country and the public are willing to take a smatteringly small amount of refugees now because of what has been done to our demographics over the last 25 to 30 years. When your average person thinks that net migration into this country is between 50 and 70,000 people a year, and it's actually 10 times that, then any number that Labour is likely to put forward to in terms of for these legal routes is going to basically overwhelm that number. And that's basically what the public thinks overall migration's at, not just refugees. So overall, and again, this is at first glance, I don't think that this will substantially change the weather. I don't think Farage will have sat there, or anyone else, or Badenoch will have sat there over the weekend thinking, gosh, this has totally changed the political weather and Labour is now serious about this problem and they're going to win the next election. I suspect really actually what's going to happen now is the fact that both Farage and Badenoch and their relevant teams are basically going to attack this as being not good enough and frankly not going far enough, which they are right. It's interesting that on the right of the of our politics now, I would argue, and okay, my politics lean in that direction, I accept that, but I think my politics, if you like, are reflective of a great deal of the country, probably an emergent majority, almost certainly emergent majority, is there is now a bidding war over who can deport how many, or put it a different way, how many people are willing to deport and how they're going to do it. And that's actually an incredibly healthy thing, insofar as the fact that the right is finally starting to react to public rage on this, particularly coming from their side, and are starting to actually realise that for a huge amount of people, it is one of their top concerns. And if you don't have an answer to it, then you probably haven't got a hope in hell in getting elected. I will be honest, I suspect that just as with when it came to me with re-immigration, I thought that I was miles ahead of the public mood and everything else. I suspect that the vast majority of public will probably converge on my view with given time. And mine is simply that the Boris wave, which equals, I don't know, let's just roughly say 2 million people now, they pretty much all need to go home. They need to be pushed out of the country. Pretty much all of the illegals, well, no, all the illegals need to go. Let's just pick a number. Let's say there's 1.5 million there. So that's 3.5 million people. And I think a huge portion of the asylum seekers / refugees that have certainly come to the country in the last 15 years, they need to, if they're safe to go home, Syria, Iraq, etc., these people need to be going home. And then finally, if you've arrived illegally, you're going home. Now, my back of a fag packet calculation on that would make that about 5 million people. Now, 5 million people, that's a lot of people to move at the best of times. So I'm not expecting any party to come in and go, wow, let's get this done. It's all going to be done in the first week or so. That's going to be a decade-long process to basically remove these people. That's going to involve retooling the British state so that it actually has the relevant resources locally to start picking up people who are working illegally, start actually finding, fining and shutting down companies that are using illegals. That deals with illegal migrants, because you basically are making their lives so miserable they can't really exist here. The same to a certain extent with asylum seekers. Most of them, to be honest, I don't really believe are valid asylum seekers. And then with the Boris wave, probably slightly different. Now, with a lot of these, it's going to be about finding them and to a certain extent locking down their ability to operate within the country. And then it's about offering them a way out. And what I mean by that is if you look at the numbers and look at how much basically a low earning person it's likely to cost the taxpayer over their lifetime, paying someone £5,000 to go home is actually a complete steal. And I think this is basically the direction of travel that Farage has got, and I think it's correct. We're going to have to basically make their lives miserable to the point where they self-deport. And by doing that, that involves basically offering them a bit of a carrot to leave at the same time. And that carrot basically could be actually increased and actually evolved into a broader offer to anyone living in or part of a community that is uncomfortable with the direction of travel. They don't want to be here for whatever reason, and they want to emigrate out of the country. We should be, as a society, going totally respect that. That we need to ensure that there is a fair system to help these people, including basically probably paying them to effectively give up their British passports. Again, this is not. This is a muscular response, to use a political term, but it's not one that has to be horrible. But it's one about ensuring that as a society and everything else that we're speaking up and actually responding to the needs of the citizens of this country and the established population, and basically saying, no, we're not going to put up with certain things and we don't need to have certain people in this country. Now, even over 10 years, 5 million people, that's 500,000 a year. That is a substantial amount of people, but I think it's completely doable. On top of that, though, alongside all these things, you would actually have to reform, on top of building out this local apparatus and actually constructing a carrot and a stick system to help people identify themselves and start to remove themselves. You actually also need to you need to actually start a process of reconfiguring our actual legal system to allow these things to happen. We can't have a situation where every single, and this is what Labour's currently thinking they can do, they can effectively leave in place the current legal structures and everything else. No, that's not possible. I am someone who largely believes we should leave the ECHR, but I don't think it's the main driver of where we are. Probably the Refugees Convention is probably the bigger problem, but actually more than anything else, it's the Human Rights Act within the which is a piece of British legislation, and both of those can go quite quickly and efficiently as long as you are actually willing to put the legwork in to get those changes made. It's not, none of this is going to be clean, and this is the thing that I would warn people of. When you're talking about this kind of stuff, you're talking about substantially retooling the state in a way that it's not been tooled for the last 40 or 50 years. You're talking about retooling the legal system, trying to change or adapt away from a legal system that Blair brought in over 30, would have been going on 30 years ago. And unfortunately, when you come into contact with the reality of how the move to effectively remove so many people, that's going to impact people's lives, and it will be very unpleasant for certain people, and we should be prepared for that. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to have their lives pulled down that they may have built here. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to complain that they should be allowed to stay. This is what you would expect. You've seen it in Trump's America, and at a personal level, in many cases, we will actually understand that. You will need to have a good system to handle that legally, because there may well be cases where, as a community, we turn around and go, well, actually, yeah, maybe you were, but, you've done X, Y, Z, we're willing to accept that. But actually, kind of at an aggregate level, at a social level, we're going to have to harden our hearts, because this is an important thing for the country, for where we are, that we get back to some semblance of normality, both in terms of our demographics, our social norms and everything else, but actually just get back to the norms of the idea that there is a line on a map. if you're in that line on the map, you're in the in crowd, you're British, or should be British, or on the way to be being British. And if you aren't legally allowed to be inside that line on the map, then you shouldn't be here. The state has a legal responsibility to police those borders. It has a security requirement to police those borders, but actually also, if you look at the cost of low value immigration into the country, it has a fiscal responsibility to police those things. The one thing that I would say is, and I was on Twitter earlier on talking about this, perhaps people saw it, perhaps they didn't, and I was talking about the impact of removing so many people from the country. Now, this is an important point that we need to say again and again and again, because it gets lost because the clever people, the lanyard classes, want us to forget about it. Let's just take a number of 5 million. If you stabilise the British population in terms of immigration and you remove 5 million people from the country, that's still only going to take the population back to about 6 or 7 years ago. Yeah, 6 or 7 years ago. That is how fast the political class have worked to destroy the demographic stability in this country. However, let's say 5 million people. What are the things what are the pluses and minuses that would come from that? You would almost certainly see house prices starting to fall in real terms. You would see a reduction in rental prices given time, because the fact there'd be less demand on the system. You would see a reduction in public service strains because basically there'll be less people making use of them. Wages would increase. Why? Because however much the clever people like to deny it, supply and demand does impact the Labour Party substantially. So if you increase supply and you leave demand the same as it was, or even marginally increase it, then basically overall wages will drop. It would force companies to invest in productivity raising tools and training, which is what they should have been doing decades ago. Automation. It is no longer good enough that you're turning around and going, I'm just going to throw an extra 3 immigrants at a problem because it's cheaper than investing in a robot or something. It would reduce our food security problems because you'd have less people in the country to feed. Therefore, you'd have less need to import so much food. I know it's simple things, but these are things that government should be thinking about. It would reduce the pressure on our water and waste systems. No, it's not going to solve all the problems of having a Victorian water system that doesn't handle grey and brown waste, handles grey and brown waste via the same sewage system. But it would certainly help to reduce it. Less people means less waste. It would certainly reduce the strain on our energy system. Less people means less electricity being used. Again, it's simple stuff. It's not rocket science. It would reduce traffic. It would just generally make the country less busy. Do you know how much more enjoyable it would be to actually move around this country with less people in it? We've all noticed it if you live in certain areas. Just the complete busyness of everywhere you go. I live in Surrey on the outside of the M25 now. Even driving around the fields at rush hour is busy. Those are just some of the top line things that would make this a positive thing to do. The only thing that negative things that, and the clever people will immediately say is like, well, you're going to get rid of all the people who do all the important jobs and everything else. My point being is we have 5% unemployment and rising in this country. And in actual fact, if those jobs that those migrants are doing at the moment are so important, then maybe the economy needs to be allowed to adapt to the fact that those jobs need to be paid more, and we need to let a load of other jobs go over there. We don't need as many restaurants anymore, for example. That's crappy for the people who are in the restaurants, but that's just a fact. We're not eating out as much. A lot of those people need to do other jobs, as should happen in any economy, right? We don't have to throw out healthcare workers before we get that one. Oh, the NHS needs... No one's suggesting you turn around and start throwing doctors out. You can be slightly picky about it, but you don't be that picky, which is what government always likes doing. The Treasury particularly turns around and goes, this is the list of critical people that with the occupations the economy needs. Sorry, people working in curry houses is not a critical job. A critical job is the country cannot exist without that job being done. Um, people, curry houses being too lazy to teach people how to cook curry, that's their problem. That is a sectoral problem they need to deal with. So same goes for brickies, electricians, plumbers, and everything else. These are jobs that can be trained for. And it is a testament to actually how mass migration has been used by business for decades, is the fact that we don't have good occupational training courses for these. Okay, learning to lay a brick, an electrician, plumbers. Those are the jobs of tomorrow if we're going to reshore. We need to start training these people. So stop looking over there to import them because you're too cheap. Start training them. More apprenticeships. Retool the universities and so much more. Okay? The negative side to this is there will be obviously certain sections of society that won't like it. That's tough. That's the same with any large change that comes from the political system. Okay? When people go, oh, like, government raises taxes, it pisses people off. It cuts taxes, it pisses people off. It adds regulation, it annoys people. It takes regulation. That is to make choices. That's making choices. That's what happens. Excuse me. The other one is that if you reduce the size of the population, then almost certainly nominal GDP will fall. Okay? And that matters because your debt is measured as the size of your overall economy. My argument for this one is really quite simple. If you were to reduce, and let's just pick numbers out, if you were to reduce GDP, nominal GDP, potentially by 5% over 10 years, this would more than be made up for by the growth in the rest of the economy anyway, particularly as the fact that overall productivity would likely boom because of the fact that you've turned off the migration tap. Companies, as I said, would be forced to invest in productivity, raising training and tools, etc. The other side of it is, with any balance sheet, there is the income, that's the potential pie, that is basically your economy. And in the other side of it is basically you've got how much you're spending versus how much you're taking in tax. Well, if you reduce nominal GDP, then the tax may drop a bit. However, I suspect that all of these things would balance out as the fact that the government would end up spending a lot less money, because ejecting 5 million, mostly low-earning people from the country, would almost certainly save money in terms of on benefits, healthcare and everything else, because simply they don't earn enough money to pay for themselves. And that's just over the short term. As every study has shown, over the long term, you are talking about, I think the number was something like £500,000 to £750,000 per migrant under a certain income scale you would save over their lifetime. So if you're talking about 5 million people times by 500,000 over a lifetime, then you're into serious money. And those are the numbers that have been calculated. So I would argue that probably the number's even higher because they always lowbar these things for various reasons. To go back to the Labour point anyway, and this is kind of really important, is I don't think this changes anything, but I think it's still important because it is the Labour Party finally admitting that this is the number one issue that people have. And I suspect that will increase as the economy here and globally continues to, unfortunately, get worse. It won't change anything in the short term, I don't think. However, I would argue that it definitely will change the political weather. You're entering a bidding war over how many people will remove them. And Labour, whatever they do here, after the Parliamentary Labour Party has hacked away at this to make it even less meaningful, they have set a direction of travel and a clear drawn line in the sand where they've gone, this is the direction that the political system's going in. and will start the process of normalizing the fact that immigration controls will only get harder and harder and harsher from here until these native established population. And when I say native, I'm not necessarily talking about in terms of white or anything else. I'm talking about the people who've been here for many, many, many generations from various caste, colours, and creeds, who basically are saying it's done now. This has to finish. This process of social destruction via mass migration has to stop. And if, as I hope, we get a Reform government or a Conservative government after the next election, which may well be sooner rather than later, then this process may well lay down both in the public mind, but actually also in structures within the government, a clear process to which we move forward from, i.e. you just add over time more and more structure around it to achieve what you need, both in terms of how the public are actually going to actually interpret these events and how they feel about it, but actually also in terms of the legal structure, the governmental bureaucratic structures, and so much more. So it's not going to change anything, but I think in actual fact it's still a really important move. So yeah, that's my longer than normal video. Speak soon.